Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Denise, please call roll.
Certainly. Chairman Maloney,
Here.
Commissioner Bates,
Here.
Commissioner Dorito, excused absence, Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Hamrick, excused absence, Commissioner Harmon,
Here.
Commissioner Ledoux,
Here.
Councilmember Gill, excused absence, and we also have in attendance our City Attorney Dan Harvey.
Okay, well, welcome Commissioner Clark. We missed you last week.
I was
You missed a good one.
miserable.
Yeah. And
Those
welcome
Becky's.
Dan? Is it Dan? Dan Harvey, thanks for being here. Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing for zoning code amendment, Title 17, new chapter 17.45, wireless service facilities. The provisions of the Canyon City Municipal Code, and in particular Title 17 thereof, the subdivision and development regulations, and the comprehensive plan of the City of Canyon City are incorporated into the record of this hearing as of set forth verbatim. Ms. Bernath, can I have a staff report?
Yes, Chairman Maloney and members of the commission. As the chairman stated, this is a zone code amendment to establish a new chapter, 1745, for wireless service facilities, which are cell towers and new types of structures that provide small cell and micro cell services. And the city wishes to establish a procedure for that so that we have some oversight over these types of facilities. However, there are some federal requirements that Attorney Harvey will get into later that allow municipalities basically some limited control. Like I said, he will expand on that. In your staff packets, there were memoranda to the council and staff that explain some of the legal aspects of that. Just very briefly, the standards for installation of these facilities include co-location of the equipment where it's feasible. It's to be allowed, these types of facilities are to be allowed as a use by right in all the districts. There are certain height limitations that are allowed for structures and those things that are going, or those types of structures that are on mounted on walls of buildings and on roofs of buildings. There are setbacks that are limited with respect to the zone district that those are located in, and also from the Arkansas River as a view corridor. There's also the shielding of structures to the extent possible. I'm going to leave my comments at that. There was no response to the public notice that was published on June 30th. And I would refer you to the findings of fact that you will be using in this hearing. There would be two motions, one to make those findings and the second to make a recommendation to council. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them, but I think that our city attorney probably is more qualified to answer a lot of these questions if you have those, if you have them. I will also be asking a couple of questions myself, so.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, if there's questions from the commissioners for staff, maybe we just route these over to Mr. Harvey at this time. That's fine. And if there's no questions, then you can elaborate on the...
Sure. I figure what I do first is just kind of give you a brief overview. What I was stating is that what I'd like to do is give you a brief overview of the federal and state requirements. There's essentially 3 or 4 laws that govern the local um, local governments and their oversight of the wireless service facilities. So one of the overarching federal laws is the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So essentially kind of the takeaway from the Telecommunications Act is that the purpose is to promote competition, reduce regulation of telecommunication providers, but it also preserves local zoning authority and allows local governments the authority over decisions regarding placement, construction, and modification of these wireless service facilities. One of the other overarching principles is also that the regulation, while the local government does have local zoning authority and is preserved under the federal law, it cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provisions of personal wireless services, and also cannot discriminate among functionally equivalent services. That's kind of the overarching federal law that governs federal, state, local government. But there's also, there's another federal law that came out a few years back, referred to as the Spectrum Act, and this concerns modifications to existing telecommunications towers and bases. These requirements were essentially incorporated into the Can you all hear me all right?
Now we
Oh,
can.
okay, now you can. All right. Sorry about that. So the overarching principle with the Spectrum Act is that the local government can't deny and shall approve any eligible facilities request for modification. An eligible facilities request is any request for modification of an existing tower, and it provides these standards of what constitutes a substantial change in the height. And then it also has a requirement for 60 days during which a local government must approve an application for modification of the towers. So I'm just giving you kind of a brief overview, and certainly let me know if, as I'm going through these, if you need any clarification or anything. The most recent state law that's come out is concerning small cell facilities. And this is referred to as House Bill 1193. So this required small cell facilities. One defines small cells. It also requires that there be this expedited permitting process, which allows up to 90 days to process an application for location, co-location, replacement, modification of a small cell facility or network. One of the more important things that was incorporated into this draft is it states that the siting, mounting, placement, construction, and operation of a small cell facility is a permitted use by right in any zoning district. And then it also provides that telecommunication providers are afforded the right to locate and co-locate these small cell facilities in the right of way on certain government-owned utilities, such as light poles, light standards, traffic signals, or utility poles. So, so that's kind of a quick overview of the basic requirements for the House Bill 1193 concerning the small cell facilities. I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you concerning small cells, wireless service facilities, and I can explain within the ordinance how I've kind of broken that down. So in terms of the small cell facility legislation, the local regulation, that can be done is that it states that a provider has to get consent from a local government prior to installing a small cell facility. And then the consent from the local government's perspective has to be based on lawful exercise of their police power that is not allowed to be unreasonably withheld. Lawful exercise essentially means legislation, you know, so that's why we've created this, this ordinance, you know, to provide an overview of how these wireless service facilities are regulated. It also allows, if the providers fail to comply with applicable law, a local government is allowed to remove the attachment, prohibit future non-compliant use. But before doing that, they have to provide notice and an opportunity to cure. And then lastly, it gets to a micro wireless facility, which it defines in the law as well. And it requires that no application or permit is required for micro wireless facilities, with the certain exceptions. You know, for instance, where there's certain precautions having to do with health and safety. So that's kind of a brief overview of the kind of the laws that we looked at in putting together this legislation, and what, you know, our goal is to incorporate the requirements of those laws while allowing the city to exercise the police power, you know, in compliance with those laws. So if you take a look at the law itself, you know, that's all right, yeah. So a lot of the definitions are taken actually from the state and the federal laws. And, you know, for instance, small cell facilities are defined straight from the statute. Micro wireless facilities are also defined right from the statute. So that kind of provides the, I guess, kind of a, I know it kind of ran through a little fast. There's a lot of terminology that's involved in that. I can certainly take any questions or clarify anything if it's helpful to you.
Okay. Any questions from commissioners at this time? Or staff? Questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
There was an earlier draft of this, and we had talked about this at a planning commission work session. And there was a request at that time to do camouflage. Is that still in here?
Yeah, I believe there is.
It may not be called that now. It may be called something different. Maybe you could point that out as to
I believe there's in the
where that is.
there's some standards that have to do with apply to all wireless service facilities, and I believe in there's a surroundings.
Okay, so blending in with the surroundings is not actually, I mean, I've heard other terminology used, and I want to make sure that when we're applying this to facilities that are coming in, that we're actually, we're applying, what I heard was, one of the terms was camouflage, which you're not using here. The other was stealth. Is that terminology not used now? Because at that time, my understanding was that you would want to try to, as much as possible, for instance, if you're putting in a new tower, you'd want it to look like a tree if you could. I mean, that's what I understand is stealth technology. Is that still allowed here in these facilities?
Yeah, I mean, actually what I was referring to is in the freestanding wireless service facilities. It states that, which is the 1745-40, it states that there's certain design standards in C. It says the facility shall be designed to be compatible with surrounding buildings and structures and existing or planned uses in the area. Yeah, I don't think we actually use the camouflage. You said that in the prior draft, we used camouflage?
Well, yes, when we first started out with this, that was a possibility that could be used. And I just am wondering if we're going to be able to ask a service provider to go the extra length to make sure that if they do put up a new tower, that we have some capability of asking for that to be looked at in that way. That's not to say that it's going to happen, but that they can provide some sort of photographic detail around that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, as long as it, is a reasonable exercise of, public health, safety, and things along those lines. I mean, the language we have now with designed to be compatible with surrounding buildings. I mean, yeah, I mean, we could.
That's what she's trying to get at. You're in some ways tying the hands of the city. A better definition.
Use your microphone, guys.
Than that, a firmer definition of what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, actually below the definition that I was just looking at actually says existing landforms, vegetation structures shall be used to screen the facilities from view and blend in the facility with the surrounding environment. I mean, we could, if you wanted kind of more clarification on that, I mean, we could, modify it.
Yeah, Dan, hi. Dina Zvetlik, Community Development Director. Just want to remind everybody with our system we have here, you have to speak literally right in front of and directly into the mic, very close to it. Reading through this briefly here, I see where there's some language under the freestanding component, but would agree with Terry that number 1 is perhaps a little more vague than we would like in terms of trying to apply that. But I think more importantly, I didn't see anything under the standards for all, specifically co-location, which we would be encouraging. And I would think we would want some language there in terms of co-location on trying to blend in with the existing facility they're co-locating on.
Yeah, I mean, I believe we could put that into the, I believe we could put that into the ordinance.
If it's allowed by those regulations that you were talking about before, we would
Yeah,
like
it would fall
to
under
make sure.
the police
Okay.
power, public
Okay.
health, safety, things along those lines.
I think that's the biggest question. Is I mean that they can come to the city for what was it, 60 days for approval, but theoretically we can't deny. So where is the policing power?
Sorry, say it again?
Where is the policing power? What kind of power? I mean, get some details, I guess, and what kind of power the city has.
Well, what is put into the legislation or into the code is, essentially if, for instance, I think in here it references the micro wireless facilities from the state law. If there's some kind of a health or safety concern with the micro wireless facilities being up, there are certain requirements that you could also impose.
What I'm understanding is that with the micro wireless and the small cell, we have a lot less police power there.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Would you say that that's accurate?
That's correct,
We
right.
have to allow it as a use by right. They're suggesting that we allow all of them as a use by right,
Right.
including the cell towers, which is fine. If I think we can still go that way. Those things that you were referring to as a police power, and Dan, if you agree, that would be we can impose setbacks, we can impose height requirements. But the way these federal laws have been established, these are basically, I think, considered essential communication facilities, and we can't deny them. One of the most important things that I came out of this when we were first starting to look at this is the ability to have some sort of camouflage and allow so that they aren't sticking up like sore thumbs where we have one at 8th and Royal Gorge Boulevard, and it continues to get higher and higher. And so that was our concern at that time. And I think perhaps that's about if that still exists as a possibility of that police power, it might be the most important one that we have. And I think we probably want to make sure that that's in here and we're able to use it and be very clear about it.
Well, I have a question. If I understood you correctly, and I understand this, the way this reads and the law and stuff, we could have one of these on every street corner.
Well, I mean, you are allowed to regulate, the number of them.
Thought I saw something about a distance between,
Yeah, or the
Between some-
distance also. There are certain ways that you can regulate them, and actually even with the small cell, which is, allows for more rights to the providers. Also allows you, if there's, you can do distance requirements, setbacks, and also, if there's some kind of a public health or safety issue, having them one next to each other, then you can certainly regulate it that way too.
You are right, though, in estimating that these are going to become much more prevalent. Because I do believe that on the small cell and micro, and I'm not that familiar with all of those, but because of the way our telecommunications are right now, especially with cell phones and their capabilities, they have to cover a lot more territory in smaller batches. And that's why these small cell facilities are going up on light poles. Now, how that evolves over time, all municipalities where there's a concentration of population are going to see in the future how this turns out. We have very limited control, but we do have some controls, and this is really kind of like our first foray into it. We've never done it before.
yes, I guess related to that, I kind of like your questioning then about whether you can do camouflage or whether the city can specify some kind of, make it part of the design package, or so to speak, of the project, and make sure it's consistent with our downtown, or, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can work on modifying the language and taking a look at it.
I'm just reading the verbiage in here, and I think we're covered on all those points. I mean, it's kind of a gray area, but.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Number
Well-
7 encourages co-locations, correct? Under
Yes.
section 40. And landscape plan, which I guess we got to be careful when we say fit in with the surrounding areas, because it could look like a dilapidated sign and it would fit in with some areas, right? So, but I get what it means. And then about dangerous to persons or wildlife, so that kind of limits any placement of a tower, standalone tower and storage facility that associated with it that would be in an obstructive spot. That's how I'm reading it. Am I?
Okay.
But there's really there's no room for any kind of special review, is there? I mean, to some extent, obviously, with zoning and that sort of thing.
Well,
there
if you
is,
go
but-
to there's an application process. And now, this doesn't apply to the small cell facilities, if I understand correctly, and it doesn't apply necessarily to there's a review process that starts on page 8, which is 1745-070, application and approval. So they would be submitting an application, providing photographic simulation showing the proposed facility, and that's where we would want to see if it's possible for them to do that kind of camouflage or whatever you might want to call that. That's where we would see it. I'm also going to suggest, Dan, that we put in a site plan, because a written narrative doesn't, and the photographs don't necessarily cite these, and they could be multiple if we're talking about the cell small cell things. And then we would have to, within 60 days, review this and make sure that it agreed with the criteria that's in the rest of this chapter, depending on the type of facility it is. I have a question for you under the expedited review, D. Can you tell me what tolling means with respect to cell phone and cell towers and stuff? I don't use that. I don't know that term.
Sure. This is, which part of section D are you referring to?
It's D1 and it's also in D2. Does this time period may be tolled only
Right.
by mutual agreement?
So, so there's the small cell facility legislation requires that the review be within 90 days. And then the Spectrum Act requires 60 days. So what we ended up doing is just creating it as a 60-day period. Both of those require allow for 60 days, but essentially by mutual agreement, if the city were to agree with one of these providers that they need more time or something along those lines, you could agree between the city and the provider, but only by mutual agreement. That's what it's
Okay,
stating.
maybe that terminology could be changed such that it's
Say
plain
what you just-
plain language for us to understand.
Say what you
Also-
just said, yeah.
Sure.
That would be helpful. This isn't an application that would be coming to the Planning Commission or the council. It would be reviewed by staff. If there was, I'm assuming that there's an appeal process in here, if there was such, how does that work? If there's a denial for what the staff might decide is an appropriate reason for denial, how is that appealed? Or is it?
Administrative decision to deny, then the provider would then be able to seek a appeal by a 106. So in other words, they could file an action to seek review of the administrative decision.
By our standard appeal process then?
I'm sorry?
Would that be through the city's standard appeal process, then through our Board of Adjustment?
Let me take a quick look through it. Yeah, I mean, I'll have to double check. I'll have to take a look through the city's appeal process to see if it would comply.
Okay.
I don't want to give you
All
a
right.
lead you in the wrong
Not
one.
knowing that this is based on state and federal standards that are unfamiliar to us. So
Right.
if that appeal process has to go through another avenue, that, just to let
Sure,
you
of
guys know,
course.
that usually isn't the case. Anything through Title 17, almost always, unless there's a special provision, it'll go through the Board of Adjustment for a review.
I'll take a look just to double
Okay.
check that. I want to
appreciate it.
lead you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay, any other questions for staff or for Mr. Harvey? Yes, sir.
I guess on the top of page 6, the minimum setbacks, we have 200 feet from the Arkansas River, and I guess in another ordinance, this commission identified Highway 50 and Highway 115 as also ideal visual corridors. Is there a reason those are not included?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
Is there a reason that Highway 50 and Highway 115 are not also included in that 200-foot setback? In similar fashion to the Arkansas River.
Yeah, I mean, we put in the 200-foot setback, at the request of the city. We didn't, you know, we hadn't received a request to include another setback. That's the only reason why.
Can you though do 200 feet from Highway 50 or 115 if you've got rights of way?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the balance that you have to do is that, like I said, with the federal and the state laws, you can't do any action that would have the effect of barring the telecommunication providers from coming in. So if you're also, because it says in the legislation, or in the draft, that this is a setback 200 feet from any principal residential structure, the banks of the Arkansas River. So I think there would just need to be an evaluation as to if we have that setback, if it has the effect of, you know, highly limiting the amount of spaces that they could, you know, site these wireless service facilities. I mean, we could. I guess the answer is we could, just as long as there isn't the effect of banning them entirely.
I think Commissioner Ledoux's comment is in regard to a recent encroachment ordinance that came forward. And in that case, I would say some of the encroachments that were being discussed there were perhaps more visually intrusive, given the type of that roadway facility, as opposed to a telecommunication structure. But understand your concern there.
I wonder if it wouldn't be appropriate for us we may not be able to do anything about, again, those small cell and the wireless, but we may be able to do something around the towers in terms of limiting them, because they're very, I mean, they could be very...
this is, I mean, under the freestanding section
freestanding.
as it is.
Right. That was also suggested in an earlier draft that may have bypassed y'all. I'm not really sure why. But it's worth looking at, because these are now being allowed. When we first started this as well, we talked about allowing this only in commercial and industrial zone districts with those restrictions. Even so, now that it's been opened up to all of the zone districts, it could very well be that this would not in any way come near to banning people being able to use towers. So we could look at that.
So, you know, 200 feet of either side of those highways and the river certainly doesn't restrict. I mean, that's still a small portion of the city. Another question on that same paragraph, it does reference existing principal residential structures. Is there an issue with a tower going in and then a principal residential structure being constructed within 200 feet? I mean, is there a problem with that situation? I mean,
well, I get, so you're saying, so the way it's written is 200 feet from any existing residential structure. So you're saying that if they had already constructed the wireless facility and then and a residential structure were to come in, is that your?
Correct. I guess
yeah, I mean, I guess that would just be kind of hard to, I mean, I guess it would be kind of hard to determine, you know, if they're citing something in a residential structure hasn't been, you know, constructed at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and if we took out the word existing, I don't know that really helps, but at least then it doesn't clarify that at the time of construction it wasn't existing. That may just muddy the waters even, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason why I put the existing is just so, you know, it kind of clarifies that when they're actually citing it, there needs to be a setback from, you know, a residential structure that's currently there.
This occurs in other situations in zoning as well when we establish setbacks. If it's already there, I mean, if the tower is already there and there isn't any other zoning or building or other restriction, and somebody wants to put site one within 200 feet, I'm not so sure that we would restrict that. Are you saying that it should be restricted?
I don't know. I guess the question becomes, somebody builds a house and then they sell it and the next people come in and say, hey, there's a tower within 200 feet of my house. That can't exist. And the reality was, at the time the tower went in, it could exist,
Right.
and now it's an issue, and that's
Right.
the,
Well,
that's the
that-
concern.
Wouldn't that be a grandfathering act?
Yes.
Yeah.
Meaning that the tower was a legal structure, legally and conforming before the house was built. So the tower can't go away. And if somebody then legally wishes to put a house within that, that setback, if you will, then that's up to them, I would think. I don't,
Yeah, I mean, I think, then we would kind of run into the issue, as you just discussed, where we would have an existing structure and then have to, essentially come in and tell the provider that they needed to move their facility, which I think would probably cause some issues for us.
that couldn't happen.
Well, and I'm thinking kind of in the direction, you think, would that put us in a quandrum at one point, maybe?
Well,
If
one of
we
the things
didn't
that-
want that facility to be there?
You could conceivably end up having someone's house or property become worthless. I don't think that we're in the business of excluding a
unless-
piece of property in that manner.
Is that different than anybody building a house by a substation or something like that? I mean, people
No.
choose to,
That's
people
that's their
choose to
choice.
do that.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to have the word existing in there, because if the word existing is not in there and a tower goes up and a separate parcel or property 150 feet away, somebody buys and wants to build a house,
Restricting them,
right?
yeah.
Any other questions?
I guess my concern is that the city's satisfied with it. I mean, there's some grayness here that I think probably you want to clear up, but, you're not going to know until this all comes about, really what's going to happen and how it's going to go. So I guess if the city's satisfied.
I think that again, like this is our first attempt to regulate these, and we have a certain amount of, while we might like to have more restrictions, the law just simply doesn't allow us to. So I think this might be a good way to get started. I have just one other thing, if I might mention to you, and on page 6 as well, at the very top, the first two sentences seem to be conflicting, and I'm wondering if we shouldn't add something like whichever is greater. So a freestanding facility shall meet the minimum setbacks for buildings and structures of the underlying zone district. And then it goes on to say, it shall be set back 1 foot of distance for each foot of height. So is it, I'm
What
wondering.
section is that, Terry?
It's at the top of page 6, section A, the first two sentences. It can't be both. So if we want to do that, maybe we should say whichever one is greater.
Right, I can make that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, before I call for a motion, do we want to review the corrections we just all discussed really quick and maybe add them as a, as a condition in the motion? So what I got was, Terry, you first mentioned that there should be a requirement of a site plan for a tower and storage structure, correct?
Yes, every application should have a site plan.
Okay. I also heard you wanted to change some terminology, and we went past it really fast. I think you were talking about the review of an application. Did we scratch that because that was something that Mr. Harvey was going to look into?
You mean the appeal process?
The appeal process, yes.
Right, I think that needs to be added in.
Okay, so we need to change the terminology in the appeal process. Does it need to be specific to?
There just needs to be an appeal process incorporated.
Yeah, well, what I just wanted to do was just take a look at the city's code concerning the appeal process and then the applicable laws. So I just wanted to take a look to see if that's something that needs to be added.
So for our purposes tonight, can we simply request that we add a terminology for an appeal process? Okay. We also talked about 200 feet from Highway 50, Highway 115. Is that something we were discussing, or is that something we want to add? In my opinion, I don't know that's necessary, but I'll let you guys decide that.
Consistency with what you were discussing before, I mean, outside of this discussion. I don't recall exactly what you brought up, but if there's an issue with consistency with that.
Yeah, I think that decision is up to you. The only concern I would have, or thought I have, in terms of adding RGB or US 50, at least in the downtown area, 200 feet in addition to the Arkansas River, you're then potentially pushing any towers to 200 feet north of US 50 or RGB, which is about Main Street.
I think we'd be running into problems if we did that.
The other concern would be that, potentially in the right-of-way itself within 50 might be a place where, these wireless service facilities might be more preferable. The other thing is that the small cell facility legislation allows for these small cell facilities to be in the right-of-way as of right in all jurisdictions. I mean, in all zones. So I think that might cause some kind of conflict between that law.
You were referring to standalone, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the standalone, and I think that the reality is 200 feet from a primary or principal residential structure pushes it. I mean, there's not a whole lot of places on 50 or 115 that are further than 200 feet from a principal residential structure anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that might come up is that, if one of these small cell facilities, my understanding is they can put them on towers, they can put them on existing wireless service facilities. So if they come to the city saying that we have as of right, we're allowed to put it in all zones, and in the right of way, they would, make the argument that we want to put a pole within the right of way, and then we would run into some kind of conflict. So I think maybe having a setback from the main road through the city, might cause some kind of issue in conflict with the small cell legislation.
But that's
The suggestion was only for
different
the,
from freestanding.
right.
Right, but what I'm saying is that there could come a circumstance where they want to put a freestanding in the right of way, and then put a small cell on top of it, which is something that I understand they can do. I'm just saying that there might be some kind of conflict, in their practices in doing something like that.
I guess, yeah, but I guess if Highway 50 and 115 are an issue, why is the Arkansas River not the same issue?
Well, it's the
If we can do it there, why not?
Yeah, so they have the small cell legislation. They're allowed to cite these within right of ways. So the Route 50 would qualify as the right of way. So that's where the kind of the distinction would be.
Can we make a distinction and apply this only to towers as opposed to monopoles or anything else? Do we have, well, there's a definition of a micro wireless, wait a minute, a wireless facility. So we have a freestanding WSF that consists of a standalone support structure such as a tower or monopole and antennae and accessory equipment. Can we apply it to towers only?
Apply what to
This setback, this distance requirement to just towers? Would that be possible? let everything else be. I don't know if that
I don't
Yeah,
think
I
is
mean,
the
it's,
same thing that you're interested in doing, Brian, but I don't, it would still allow monopoles, and then perhaps these micro wireless, and then the small cell stuff to still go in.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
think we'd still run into kind of that issue if they wanted to put some kind of a, monopole or something along those lines in the right of way, and then also put a small cell on it. I think we'd still kind of run into that same issue.
I don't think in this legislate, or the, what do you call it, the Act of 1996, I don't think it doesn't separate these
Okay.
structures. So I think we would run into trouble trying to separate the structures. That's just my opinion, but.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the way that we read the small cell legislation is that they have as of right, they're allowed in all zones, but there's kind of this almost an implicit requirement that because they can site them on poles and stoplights and even other wireless service facilities, that essentially we would run into these issues where they would want to site something on top of a monopole or something along those lines, and we would have to allow them to do that. I mean, essentially that we're just thinking that in practice something like that could potentially happen.
Surely that pole has to have been constructed, correctly before a small cell piece is put on it.
Right.
So if we have a setback for a tower, I mean, just because you can put a small cell on a tower that doesn't force the issue of having a tower within the setback, right? I mean, the tower comes first, small cell comes second.
I think we're trying to complicate things by trying to co-locate and co-discuss the small cell. I think the question at hand is purely about sort of the freestanding up to
Large
100-foot
structure,
Right.
yes.
structures.
Right. Maybe what we could do is this. If you guys want to proceed on and have this go forward to council, we could ask that the attorney look into this and then explain to the council why or why not this is a good or not a good idea. Would you be willing to do that? Just have them explore it, and then when they get to council, we'll talk about it more?
Fine with me.
Is
I'd be
that,
fine with that.
are you good with that, Dan? Okay. So they will explore that possibility.
So is it recommended, are we recommending we add it as a modification to the,
And you can say exactly that way, that they're going to explore the possibility of adding those additional setbacks for large structures or large towers only.
And you could specify Highway 115 and US 50.
what's a better way to say US, Highway 50 and 115, major,
No, just the, I
just
think.
Highway 50 and
Mhm.
Highway
And
115?
Mhm.
Okay, so to recap, the amendments we're discussing is, one, we should add a site plan requirement. Two, we should add an appeal process. Three, we should add the verbiage to section 17.45.040, that whichever is greater as pertaining to the, oh, I already forgot.
Setbacks.
The setbacks, correct? And that we should explore the possibility of setbacks for standalone towers along Highway 50 and 115. Are there any other questions or concerns? Okay. So I'm going to close the public hearing at this time. No one else is okay? And I'd like to call for a motion and a second on the findings of fact.
I'd like for you guys to refer to your findings of fact. It's at the end of your staff report. And you can read from that if you wish.
A motion. I move that Canyon City Planning Commission, upon conducting a public hearing on the above captioned zoning ordinance amendment, and after considering the testimony presented by city staff and any other interested parties, find as follows: that 1, the notice of public hearing was properly given as required by law, and 2, the proposed amendments are necessary and appropriate.
Thank you, Commissioner Harmon. Do we have a second? Commissioner Ledoux? Any further discussion? Denise, call roll, please.
Certainly. Commissioner Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Bates?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call for a motion and a second on the recommendation of the commission. Motion number 2. Who wrote it all down besides me? Whoever wrote it down, please make the motion.
Sure. Based on the above findings of fact, the Canyon City Planning Commission hereby makes the following recommendations to the council of the city of Canyon City. Approval of the amendments to the zoning ordinance, but with the following modifications: that we add a site plan requirement, that we include an appeal process, that we add, this is where I'm getting lost here, to 1745 40 designation of
Whichever is greater.
whichever is greater in the zoning requirements.
For the setbacks.
And we explore the possibilities for setbacks for Royal Gorge Boulevard and Highway 115.
Or standalone
For
towers.
standalone towers, that's correct, yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ledoux? Any further discussion? Did we miss anything? Denise, call roll, please.
Commissioner Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Bates?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Okay. At this time, any other announcements or anything to talk about?
We do have a couple of items. First of all, and I think that we mentioned this at the last meeting, we would like to have participation from the city attorney at planning commission meetings. We find that we need their advice more often than not. And our new city attorney, that group, Hoffman, Parker, et al., is not available on Tuesdays at all. So we have been working with the city clerk and the city administrator to try to determine a new day. And we have arrived at one, or close to one. And for various reasons, Mondays are not good. Obviously, Tuesdays are not good. Most Wednesdays are not good. However, we are going to suggest the 4th Wednesday of the month, and we would start the meetings at 6 o'clock, not 7 anymore. And we want to know if you guys are pretty much okay with that.
Checked with your council representative.
I have not.
You know what his vote's gonna be, right?
No, I don't.
Well, it's changed from the last time you brought this stuff up.
Well, I know, there were any number
I'm
of
trying to
people who were
represent-
not
I'm
happy.
I'm trying to represent him here.
Okay. Well, that's all right. We're not going to actually do this yet. I want to get your feedback. We want to go back and discuss it and see if there's, if this simply isn't going to work, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board.
And we let everyone check calendars, schedules, and decide on the 4th Wednesday of the month to change the planning commission meeting. And then that's not something we have to worry about. Can we vote by email?
Yes. Mhm.
And
If you
then-
would email me as soon as you can.
Can you send out an email to all the commissioners just saying, hey, this was discussed on Wednesday night, here's the deal, please, everyone send a response, I'll give you 24 hours. And then we'll just, I think we already tried that once, but let's do it for real. And just give everyone a day or so to check their calendars.
Are you able to get a hold of Mark?
Yes, I can. Do you know, does anybody know how long he's going to be gone? I know Mr. Hamrick is also on vacation.
Last time I checked, he was heading for Virginia, so.
Okay. All right. Well, I can contact him. I'm sure that's what he wants to be thinking about while he's on vacation, but yes, we'll ask him.
Be a
Okay.
pleasant interruption, maybe.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah, then we'll take a vote and then we'll,
Okay. The other item is that we need to do an orientation. I know you guys were thrown into the deep end of the pool last week.
I thought that was orientation.
There you go.
that was the worst
Never
night.
mind.
Or whatever that was called.
So we would like to
Initiation.
have that's what it was.
It's initiation.
No, now we're gonna back up and have orientation. Just want to let you know that we've done this in the past. We don't do it regularly, but we have very many new members. I mean, 3 new members, and we also have a new attorney team. So we're going to schedule something. I'm not going to give you a date yet, but it's usually during the day, in the afternoon, more like late afternoon, 2 to 5. And it will be here in the council chambers, and it's more of a forum where you can ask questions. We'll go through a lot of different, actually probably your whole orientation packet book that you've all been provided with, and kind of help you guys get a little bit more familiar and comfortable with your position here. If we decide on something, are most of you guys available? Can you make it? It's a one-time thing. I think,
Yes.
Brian, you've been through it once before, but we really would like to start doing it more like on a yearly basis. Okay.
I would suggest looking at the Doritos restaurant schedule, what day they're closed, and maybe picking that day, just for the sake of Commissioner Dorito.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
I hadn't
They
thought
might be
about
closed
that.
on Mondays or.
They are closed on Mondays.
Oh, there you go.
So maybe a Monday afternoon? Okay. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, we can try to accommodate him that way. These were the only announcements. Dina, did you have anything else?
That was it.
Anybody else?
Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you.